Hello, hi, this is Robin, and today, when I can get this into focus, I'm going to be doing a review of Dungeon Crawl Classics. And I did attempt this yesterday, but I had all sorts of technical issues, so I've decided start again properly and work from the beginning through. So without further ado and no more extra waffle, I'm going to talk about a game called Dungeon Crawl Classics. It's a role-playing game, which means traditionally you'd sit around a table, roll dice, and one person would judge the game or games master it, which means they're facilitating the game. You roll dice to represent the actions you take in the game, and you have a character you're playing, so it's kind of amateur dramatics plus an adventure in the standard vein of a dungeon crawl. So essentially most of the time you're trying to bash monsters inside a dungeon, but there may be a plot and other exciting things going on. All these things, of course, are familiar to the role player out there that's played these things before, but in this instance I'm going to talk through Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is a specific type of game built on Dungeons and Dragons using the Open Game license, and it was published in 2012 originally, written by Joseph Goodman, and that's why it's by Goodman Games, who have a huge range of modules and games. So lots of support for this in the last 8 years or so, and I think they're now up to their 7th or 8th printing of this. And that's one thing worth mentioning, is that even though they've reprinted this with different covers and different styles, it's still the same base core rules that they published back in 2012, and it's kind of stood the test of time, really. So that's one great thing about it. It's still out there. It's still a regular game. I'm sure as they updated it and reprinted, they fixed any typos or clarifications in there, but the core rules didn't change. The other thing worth mentioning as a rule set is it's thick for a start. Look at that, it's almost telephone directory style, isn't it? I haven't actually counted the pages. 504 pages, so it's a massive, great tome. However, the rules are quite light and everything's complete in there, so you don't need a separate monster manual. You don't need anything for additional, well, let's say you could create your entire adventure from this. You can create the characters, you know how to judge it or games master the whole thing, all in the one module and the one big fat book. So, right, so let's dive in and have a look what's involved. What I'm not going to do is make characters. So I'm going to stay here and keep the focus on just an overview of the game and what's unique about it, rather than diving into character creation. But I will talk about the different characters you can play in there and generally run through it. Also, I'm doing this live, so if anybody does come on to Facebook or YouTube, please post a comment under my Facebook stream, because it will appear up there. Let's say up there will be your text, and then I can respond to that. So if you say, oh, what's that nonsense you're saying about something, you know, zap me a message in Facebook or on YouTube. The YouTube address is down here at the bottom, and Facebook, well, if you're on Facebook, you'll see me there. Yeah, so I'm live, and this is interesting. I'm kind of experimenting a bit with Facebook, because having been mostly a YouTube person, and I do a bit on Twitch, but I haven't really got many followers because I started more than 10 years ago on YouTube doing videos. I'm doing the streaming now on Facebook and adding it as a stream destination, but no one seems to watch videos on YouTube unless they're those kind of short clips of someone falling over or throwing an ice bucket over their head. So this is going to be probably an hour or more of me going on in detail about this, in which cases I just don't think it's very good format on Facebook. People look on their phone and go, oh look, Robin's live, oh swipe that off, go on to something else. But I won't go on about that anymore, because it's an interesting platform, and I thought, you know, I'd start to get into Facebook to stream as well, because it just seems, you know, especially with lockdown at the moment, that it's a potential new channel to use. Right, the first thing to mention is that as a book it has some fantastic artwork, and so for some people that might put them off, because it's that retro theme of art which you may associate with the sort of old school role-playing. This is Peter Mullen's artwork I particularly like. He does really great use of white space wherever he's drawing it out in that kind of retro style, and it's crammed full of art. So that's what I mean, I really love it. again, you may like the more modern style that you see in a Pathfinder book or a Dungeons and Dragons book, but I find this is really evocative of the kind of feel of gaming that I like. And they really use the space. So as you can see on this table of contents, they've crammed in the art, and not only have they crammed in the art, they've added all of the text as part of it. And I just think that's really good use of space. It has a kind of retro feel to it, but it's the kind of thing I like. So it's worth mentioning that from the outset. You've got some really nice evocative art. Peter Mullen again, excellent stuff. And that's crammed all through the book. So wherever there's a table or other bit of information you may need to look at, you'll find some nice tasty morsels of artwork through there. In fact, they've got a sort of list of the artists down here. And obviously, as I said, Joseph Goodman is the author, and this was first published in 2012. And then we've got art. Doug Kovacs, very famous, does lots of art for Goodman Games. Peter Mullen as well, who I mentioned, does that black and white. But then interior art, they've got a huge stack of artists that they use. And they regularly come back to those artists. And in fact, when I mentioned earlier on that this is published and has been republished and reprinted so that it's pretty much the same rules are in there, nothing's changed in the rules, but 8 years now they've done 7 or so printings, and they've kept redoing, they keep this main standard cover, which you'll see if you look on the website or anywhere for a copy, but they've done some glorious cover artwork. So I think I have something to hand. I did have something to hand, but I haven't got anything to hand. But anyway, they do hard copy versions of this artwork where they've got foil covers and a different spine on every one. People love it so much, even though the rules are the same, they buy these just as a collection because they're such a nice set of art on the cover as a collector kind of piece. So that's worth interested as well, that people are actually that keen on it and that they keep on buying new copies. Same content, but they just love the new artwork on the covers. Hello, Mark. Oh, thanks for putting a post. Love the old school artwork, but you're right that the cover does give the impression that it's older rule set with the baggage those bring with them. Yeah, that's true. It's this is the cover that they've used over and over again with the reprint, and some of the newer foil covers that they've done with a kind of hardback, because this is a softback, are they look a lot more together than this sort of older style art. But it's still quite charming, you know. Even though it's just sort of one character there and a door in the distance, it doesn't give you that feel of a group going against the darkness or anything. Right, okay, into the book then. So I've got various sections and things that I wanted to say. One of the key things as well, actually, to start with, is that, we'll turn the page so we can have a look in there while we're chatting away. One key thing to mention is that it's sort of inspired and built off the version 3 or 3X of Dungeons and Dragons. So that's why it uses the open gaming license. That's a license that allows people to reuse a lot of the content and rules that come in Dungeons and Dragons. And what they've done with this, which is a key thing, is that even though they've kept the sort of stat block, they have tweaked them a bit. So there's essentially some stats in there like luck, and they've changed things like constitution to be, I think it's stamina, is it? So there's a few differences in the way that they've done it. In fact, if I find the bit about stats and sit on that page, then I'll be able to tell you what all those different statistics are. So yeah, like they've called it stamina instead of constitution. I mean, it's a minor tweak, really. Agility instead of dexterity. Personality, obviously that's charisma. You know, if you're comparing it back to Dungeons and Dragons. And intelligence, they've still got int in there. That's matched the same. But then they've got a stat on there for luck. So rather than having wisdom, they've gone for a kind of you know, you've got the personality, but you've got the intelligence, but then instead of wisdom, you've got luck. Oh, and of course, strength is the other one in there too, the classic strength, and that matches D&D, and that is a bonus to all your martial skills, which is the typical approach. Oh, if you know, if you're making a roll to break a door down or something, you'd use strength as well. So that harks back and obviously means that the whole system is essentially aligned mostly to the D20 style of play. So there's my D20 here. And you roll a dice in most instances and add a skill to it, which might be aligned with one of these particular statistics. So if you're fighting, you'd add your strength to it, or if you're breaking a door or something. If you were trying to have a conversation with someone to bargain down a price of some goods you were buying in an inn or a provision store, you would use your personality bonus. So that's the classic statistic build, and that's its foundation of this game. So it is very much like Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, if no one told you, you could probably slip into this and be fooled initially by a few different stats like this, but actually then you'd feel like you were playing the same thing and rolling a similar dice model. Now, it is worth mentioning, though, there are what's called funky dice in Dungeon Crawl Classics. So although you have that classic D20, there's a whole range of other dice I've got down here, and I'll mention those later on and show you those a bit of a close-up on those too. But there is a different method on there for some rolling where you go up through a dice range by jumping up to a different size dice, but I'll talk about that, as I say, later on. So yeah, I think I've given you the overview. So it's had those 8 printings. It's out in 2012, written by Joseph Goodman, published by Goodman Games, which is obviously Joseph Goodman's company in the USA. And that's the other key fundamental. The Appendix N, which is worth mentioning, which was in all the original Dungeons and Dragons books back in the day, from the sort of 70s and 80s era, where Gary Gygax was the author amongst others there. That produced the various versions, and then they were re-edited and re-released in second edition as they expanded out. But back in those early books, they had an appendix called Appendix N, and in there were all the references to authors that inspired Gygax and others to write Dungeons and Dragons, and kind of, what novels were they reading that really inspired them to play a certain type of game. And those were by people like Fritz Leiber, like the Swords of Lankhmar, Michael Moorcock with his Elric series, or Hawkmoon, or Corum was another one, wasn't it? And then Jack Vance, which is obviously a very key one, because Jack Vance had the magic system, essentially, that Dungeons and Dragons is mostly based off. And Robert E. Howard with that Conan style too. So you'll get that feel for this within this book set, and all of the adventures that they do for it, because Dungeon Crawl Classics is really fundamentally based off those Appendix N novels, where they've said, okay, how can we inject that kind of Conan movie or novel style into an adventure? How can you get that Michael Moorcock chaos and everything into the books as well? So that's nice to know that they really are trying to focusing on what those inspirations were. They haven't looked into sort of modern films or things. They've gone back to those 70s and 60s books to say, okay, what made that fantasy and what originally inspired it, which is great. So that's out of the way. Now, level 0 is the next thing I wanted to talk about. Obviously, in most adventure games like Dungeons and Dragons, you start at level 1. Oh, Jason, yeah, Mutant Crawl Classics, as I understand it, is it's basically the same rules, but they have tweaked it up to be even more gonzo style. So it's kind of like primitive people that have come across technology. I guess the nearest analogy to that would be something like Planet of the Apes, where the people have become all sort of primitive, and yet there may be modern equipment like rifles and things hanging around, which they don't understand, and obviously end up pointing the wrong end at the enemy or what have you. So that's the kind of Mutant Crawl Classics style. Thanks for placing a comment on there, Jason. And so back to level 0. So most games, as I said, Dungeons and Dragons, and nearly every role-playing system out there based off that, and even completely different types of games, start at level 1. You'd pick, I'm going to play a warrior, we're going to have a certain kind of sword, and you'd play like that. Thundar the Barbarian, yeah. Or Thrud, yeah, which was the Games Workshop Barbarian, wasn't it? But in Dungeon Crawl Classics, you can start at level 0 if you like. I mean, this is an option, but it's very much recommended. And what you do with your level 0 is that you're basically picking a occupation or rolling for an occupation. So let's roll one and see what we get on this. It's a D100. So I'll just roll that out and see what comes up. So I've got 30. And 30 means I'm an elven barrister. I'd start with a quill as a dart, which could be used as a dart by the looks of it, and a book. So there's a whole stack on there. I'll just fire up another one. 90, that sounds like it might be a good one. A squire, Oh, that is a good one. Start with a longsword. So you've got, oh, and a steel helmet as well. So you've got a whole range of these level 0 type occupations. And the idea behind this is that you're essentially starting as a peasant of the land, or or a squire, but a lowly person in the medieval fantasy heroic style setting, where you've got to a point where you've decided, right, I want to go out on adventure now. I'm fed up with being a squire or a rope maker or a ditch digger, and you want the next level. So that's where you jump into the game, you pick a level 0, and then you would run through what's called a funnel game. So the judge running the game would pick an adventure called a funnel, specifically written to deal with level 0 characters. And then you'd also have 4 level 0s, or maybe 3 or 4 level 0s, depending on the number in the party. If you had 5 players, you might have 3 level 0s each. So you get a bit of fun where you basically knock together 3 of these level 0 characters, or 4, and just dive into the game. And they also encourage that when you're doing that with your statistics, if I go back to these stats, agility, stamina, strength, intelligence, luck, that you would roll 3d6 for each one, and then take exactly that number that you get in the order that you put it in. So you'd go strength. What's my strength? I wish I'd now had 3d6 dice out. Let's do that. Let me take a moment. So if I fire up my GoPro a bit locally there so you can see the dice roll. So I'd go strength. What's that? It's a 7, 8. And you would literally take that and write that straight on the character sheet, and then go on to the next. So agility. Well, that's a lot better. So that's much better, 14. So you, instead of what's typically the style now in Dungeons & Dragons, where you might roll 4 dice and then throw away 1, the lowest, so you'd get a 1 on one of them and you say, okay, I'll get rid of that, take the 3. And the other thing that tends to happen in D&D style modern games is you then say, okay, I've got a 17 on my 4 dice, while I've taken 1 out and I've got 3 left, it's come up to 17. I'm going to put that in my, into my dexterity or into my wisdom, because I know I'm going to build a certain character class. But what they've done again in Dungeon Crawl Classics is said, roll with it, go with exactly what you get. You're going to have 3 or 4 of these level 0s when you play through your first game. So rather than worrying that, have I got stamina correct, or have I got a certain thing in the right place, across your characters you're bound to have 1 or 2 maybe good ones, or at least 1 good one in there. And when you play through the funnel, you're kind of pushing the different one forward in your kind of marching order and saying, okay, my ditch digger is going to be pushed forward because he's got rubbish stats and I don't care, and he gets into the fight first. And then your better squire, perhaps, that you randomly rolled on the occupation table that had a longsword, he may have higher stats just because they randomly came up better, and you'd hold that one back and maybe hopefully get that one to survive to level 1. But where I've found, because I've played in it and I've judged or run the games, is that quite often it's the crappy character that survives. So you've got someone with poor stats, but they might have 1 good one, or 1 or 2 features of them that are good. And through some sort of luck of the gods, or luck of the dice gods, they get through that funnel adventure and go up to level 1. And your good character, you thought you had dreams and visions of turning into a knight or a warrior of some kind, because they had a better stat block, and unfortunately takes a hit at some point and passes away. We'll go into death and dying later on, but it is a bit of fun that you basically, rather than focusing on a big extensive background where I've come up with a family of elders in the forest of wise elves, and here's my entire background of I was orphaned at this age and I was brought up by a wizard in a den and by a bunch of bears then trained me in the ways of bear fighting. Instead of that, you just go, let's get straight in. I roll what my background is. I know I'm a dock worker, and then it's a level 0, and you play and you build out your background as you play through that funnel. There's no harm in, of course, using this system and starting at level 1 and coming up with more extensive backgrounds, but they encourage that kind of more random play. You dive into the adventure and then get stuck in at level 0. So as you can see at level 0 here, if I bounce back up to the desk view, This will zoom in to the level 0 piece here. So you can see all characters start at level 0. Most will die in the dungeon. So essentially you've got that tricky moment where they may get wiped out on that first level. But you only get 1d4 hit points, but it is modified by stamina, and obviously if you had a higher stamina, you get more hit points per level, and you add that bonus to it. You get a few copper pieces, you get no experience points. You do get a random piece of equipment you can roll up, and then obviously the occupation I mentioned before, and then based on the occupation you get possession of the weapon or training to use it, and a few trade goods, which is listed on that occupation table on the next page. So basically that's how you dive into it, which is a lot of fun, I think, and when I've played the funnel games or run them, I've often found people quite surprised. The ditch digger is essential and would be allowed out at the moment to do ditch digging, not so much the cut purse or the famous one on here, which is gong farmer. And of course gong farmer is someone that deals with poop of a variety of kinds. I don't know if that's human or cattle based gong, but that's what they have to do. And so that's it. Occupations at level 0, they're all about getting you into the game and having a bit of fun, where you say, okay, I'm going to let the winds of fate and chaos blow me wherever it happens to be, rather than spending a copious amount of times on a background and then finding that they die in the first game. So that's that. So I did mention that level 0 funnel game, they call it, and there's lots of adventures that they've done. In fact, they put a funnel in here at the back. I think there's 2 different funnel games in here. There's Portal Beneath the Stars, right at the back here. So there's a couple of adventures in here to get you started as well, which is handy to know for the level 0 to level 1. Portal Beneath the Stars. Ratcatcher. Yeah, I think that there is a Ratcatcher. Let's have a look at the starting. Well, there's a rope maker, urchin, shaman, scribe, outlaw, halfling, gypsy, healer, herbalist, herder, hunter, indentured servant. Well, I can't see one that's specifically called Ratcatcher, but there's no harm in actually creating one and sticking it in, or if you actually ended up with something like you came up with a indentured servant staff, you could say that they were also a Ratcatcher or something, I guess. And again, that's in the spirit of the game, really, Mark, in that they do say just whatever the rules are, go with what you like anyway. That's the idea of sort of judging the game as you play it, that you can do what you like. So yeah, the level 0s, you get through the level 0s, and XP in here, as we can see here, the thresholds are very low, although the XP is generally harder to come by. It's not in your thousands like you'd expect in most of the sort of D&D style and spin-off D&Ds like Pathfinder. It's actually very low. So to get from level 0 to level 1, it's 10 experience points. And typically, even when you're playing that level 0 funnel, you can level up during it. So if you're doing enough encounters within the level 0 game, you could level up. I found most of my funnel games would be over in one evening, actually, or one sitting, or 2 at most. And that's when you then pop the characters up to level 1, and you could do that in either 1 or 2 ways. You could say you finish the adventure, now you're all level 1, or you could halfway through, if you're rewarding experience by encounter, so 1 or 2 experience typically by encounter. I think they say between 1 and 4 for an encounter, depending on how extreme the encounter is. So you could end up jumping up to level 1 before the end of that funnel game that you have, so in one sitting. So that's the other thing about level 0 in here that may concern people. Oh, I don't really want to play a real, I don't know what you'd call it, a pleb or a real peasant, because they've got no skills and no abilities. They've got no bonuses and they haven't got spells or anything. You know, they're literally a vanilla peasant type from that list. But if you then recognise that potentially within the first evening they're going to get to level 1 and they're going to have some fun adventures getting there, then actually it's quite a good piece of fun to add into the game, where you're setting an interesting background for them while you're playing through. Or at worst case, after the funnel, they're going to be level 1 anyway, unless you've got a really harsh judge that's trying to keep you down at a low level. So now on to the real character classes. So you've got Cleric. which is the traditional. It's got some healing. It's got all of your classic turn undead. You've got thief, and the thief is sort of your rather than, I know they in later versions they changed thief to rogue, didn't they, in Dungeons and Dragons, to make it a bit more roguey and less focused on the stealing. But they've gone back to the old school style thief in here with the traditional names. Then in addition to that, you've got a whole load of bits and pieces. Again, another example of where they've got the artwork spread out here, and they've put different panels in, which is a very intriguing way of using up that space. I like it. Warrior, and your warrior is your classic combination. There's no barbarian class, so warrior in this is both a barbarian and a fighter. You know, it's whatever you want it to be. It could be a paladin as well, but essentially you are playing a warrior, and then you decide whether you're a holy warrior or whether you're playing a more chaotic sort of barbarian type. That's going to be down to how you play it rather than there being a specific class for barbarian. And got the thing about militant orders there for your warrior. Then you've got your wizard. Again, very spell focused, and they're quite powerful in this. It's worth mentioning from my experience of playing it. There is quite a lot of power in there in terms of once you get up a couple of levels as a wizard, you're not going to feel really left behind because you can do quite a lot of damage with your spells. And then this is where we start at the races as class. So this harks back to the sort of old school Renaissance style original D&D in that you've got races as class in this. So when you do a dwarf, even though you may have rolled on that table initially that you were a dwarf, I don't know what, we didn't have rat catcher, did we? But if you were a dwarf peasant of some kind, when you level up to a level 1 dwarf, you are both class and race as one. So you're not picking dwarf and then saying, I'm now going to be a dwarf fighter or a dwarf thief or a dwarf wizard. You are basically a dwarf, and that essentially means you get some nice features in there as a dwarf. It's a sort of a blend between a sort of fighter and a sort of tough character. Really, they get 1d10 hit point dice per level, and I know the warrior gets 1d12, I think. So they're nearly up there with the warrior in terms of toughness, but they have some other very interesting things that they can do as well, which is specific to their class. One of them being smell gold, which is, I think, is a really good adventure hook, that the dwarf can smell gold, and they love gold as well. So that again has a nice feel to it in terms of adding to the narrative of the game. Elf, and an elf, of course, is that classic mix between a fighter and a wizard in one. So yes, and again, like I said before, it's both your class and your race. So you're not picking elf and then picking a thief. You're basically an elf, and that gives you those fighter plus some wizard type abilities at the same time. And then finally, the last character class, I think it is halfling. And the halflings, you know, they're classic hobbits. They're very interesting because they don't have rangers and things in here, but the halflings have the dual fighting ability, so dual wielding, tend to be small weapons as well. But again, I think a halfling's probably something in between a thief and a fighter as a character class. But they have some abilities like they're a good luck charm in the party, which means they're very good for sharing around a luck statistic, which I've mentioned earlier, but I'll go into luck in a bit more detail soon, because it's a very key statistic and fundamental to how you sort of play the game, really. Luck, well, it affects many things in the game. It's quite an interesting statistic. But halflings can regenerate their luck. Well, not all character classes can do that. So being able to regenerate luck and then burn it off again later makes them a really handy character to have around. So they're like that little lucky charm, which again, I suppose it has that Tolkien feel to it, doesn't it? That you bring a halfling along with you, and you're going to have some luck. Something will happen that will fall on their lap at some way or another. So yeah, I will go back now just to mention luck, because before I mention skills and things, because that's it's worth just talking about what luck can do for you in the game. So yeah, luck. So obviously all the traditional stats, strength, agility, quite obvious what you'd use those for. Stamina builds up your hit points more. They increase more by level if you've got a bonus in there. Obviously only if you've got a bonus by having a higher number. Personality, charm, wit, will, persuasive talent, affects willpower saving throws, and then intelligence. And then luck, basically, which you'd roll up with a 3d6. So let's just roll up a 3d6 on luck. That's not a great one. I'm going to roll again. Pretend you didn't see that. I'm still not rolling too good, but that's a 10. I don't think I get a bonus on a 10, no. But with a luck, you essentially got a statistic that you can burn down. So if you get to a point in the game where you're desperate to survive and you think, if I can just make this one last hit against a monster, you would then use some luck to give you a bonus on the roll. So essentially, if you had a luck of 10, which I just happened to roll up with those 3d6 there, I don't get a bonus on this, but I could say I'm going to use 5 of my luck to really make sure that I hit the monster by adding it to my attack roll. So I'd get a 14, and then I would say I'd add 5 of my luck to that, taking up to a 19. You don't have to do that until after you've made the roll as well. So if you make the attack and you think you're going to miss, and you think, oh, if I just added another 2 to that, I would hit, that's when you can say, I'll use that luck to do that. So again, at level 0 and level 1, that luck is a great statistic to have to just give you that edge to get you over a particular, tricky spot to survive. You just need to make that climb roll, otherwise you're going to fall off into a burning lava pit. You make the roll, you realise you're going to fail. If only you could add another 2 points to that, you would have succeeded. You then go, I'm going to burn some luck to do that. And now, of course, luck doesn't regenerate, so that statistic will just go lower and lower over time. However, halflings and thieves have a way of rebuilding up luck again. So halflings in particular are very lucky, so they can sort of rebuild the statistic, and there's a mechanic to do that. So again, it's a reason to take some more halfling, even though they're a bit smaller. They are the lucky character in the party, really. Now, the other side to luck is that it affects both your rolls that you make on fumble tables can be negatively or positively affected by your luck, depending on if you've got a modifier. And again, like if you had an 18 in luck, you get a +3 bonus. Anything below 9, you start to get minuses on your luck, which makes you kind of unlucky on fumbles and critical rolls. However, there's also another aspect to luck, which is once you've picked your luck and you've rolled the statistic in, then you roll on a lucky table here, which is a d30. I happen to have a d30 here again. Oh, I rolled a 1. So that would be really, really poor. All my harsh winds, all my attack rolls are modified by my luck. Now, of course, if I had a bonus to my luck and had a 14+, that means all my attack rolls would get a bonus. So that's actually not too bad a thing to get. However, there's other things down here like lucky sign means that all your saving throws, which are will, reflex and fortitude, are all modified by your luck. And of course, that, as I said, that can be both a good and bad thing, because if you've got a minus modifier in your luck statistic, that means that every saving throw you roll, you're going to have a minus on. But that's only one item that you roll on there. And sometimes they also say that it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to use this bad luck or good luck, depending on whether you've got a minus or positive statistic. Because you could end up saying something like, oh, you get an armor class or a speed or something that's totally unrelated to what your class is. Of course, armor class works for everybody, but there is something on here like fumbles, and if you were maybe a wizard and weren't attacking very much, so you would potentially not be rolling that many fumbles as a wizard. So yeah, so that's luck. It's a really key statistic in the game, quite sort of fundamental to how it plays out. Hi Andy, hello. How are you over in Texas at the moment? Feeling good? I hope so. Oh, and Devon, so you're saying I've been running DCC in a Swords and Sorcery style, Robert E. Howard and Clark Ashton Smith, no non-humans and a bit gritty. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting approach, and I know that there's a book, module actually, called The Chained Coffin. I'm trying to look, I think it's a Michael Curtis, is it? Yeah, Chained Coffin is one of their adventures by Michael Curtis. It's like a setting, which is a bit like the Appalachian Mountains without mountain men, but all of the demons and devils and everything that comes with a high fantasy game is in there. But one thing he recommends in that setting is that potentially don't run it with any of the demi-human classes, so it's kind of restricted. If you like, I mean, you can run them if you like, but like Devon's just said he's doing there, he's running it in that kind of gritty Robert E. Howard style, which means no non-humans, which is good fun. I mean, and the game does support that style too. So a little bit more conversation then on the warrior class, and just one particular thing in that when you're a warrior and you get to that first level, obviously you get your 1d12 hit points for a start, but you also get your mighty deeds, and mighty deeds are essentially a bonus to every roll. It starts at a d3, so I've got a d3 here, which is basically a half a d6, but that's a d3. But if you were attacking and you wanted to, and as a warrior, you'd always get that as an extra dice to your d20. So it just makes you have a varied bonus to attack. Of course, in traditional Pathfinder and D&D, the bonus is static. So as you go up a level, you get like a +1, +2. As you increase your level within fighter class or barbarian or whatever class it happens to be. But in here, you just get a larger dice at higher levels. And I think, yeah, it goes up to D4, D5, D6. And that's where I mention again the funky dice, where they do D7s and D5s and all sorts of different sort of dice types in this pot. I'll go into that again later. But yeah, so as a principle, rather than a set plus to your attack, you get a dice, and that means that you roll that, you add your 3 and your 1 mighty deeds dice together for a +4 on that attack. That would typically fail, wouldn't it? Anyway, whatever I was attacking, let's try to roll better. Yeah, so a 10 and a 1, so that would be an attack of 11 against whatever armor class that you were fighting against. But if that mighty deeds comes up with a 3 at any point, or is ever 3 or more, so as you go up a level, you might end up with a d6 as your dice, as your mighty deeds dice at a higher warrior level. If that comes up at 3+, or this initial d3 comes up with a 3, you can then do a mighty deed, and that's like feats were in the sort of your D&D 3 and 3X editions, in that you can do all sorts of crazy things like kick dust into someone's eyes. I think there's a section of it in the combat section, but it says here you can, an example, when fighting a flying skull that was out of melee range, a character leaps from the back of an ally into a flying lunge, so like a salmon fish attack in that Celtic style, that brought him within reach of a melee swing of the skull. So it's just a creative way of doing either pushbacks, tripping up, knocking weapons, targeting a specific thing. So okay, I whacked that warrior, so he dropped his shield, and if the mighty deed was a success with a 3+, that's when that's going to then trigger. So it's like a varied feat that applies to absolutely anything you can creatively think of if you do get 3+ on your mighty deed dice. And I like that. That makes the it really is a differentiator that, again, like everything about this limited set of different classes they've got in here, cleric, warrior, wizard, thief, elf, and halfling, is that does make them very unique and different. No one else apart from the warrior is going to get that very dice on there. Beautiful weather at the moment. Yeah, looking forward to running my 6th monthly 5e session right on Roll20. Well, good luck with that. Your 6th monthly, so that's 6 in the last month. Oh, excellent work. Hopefully you won't get drained doing that. So yeah, wizard. Spoke about the warrior and what makes that unique with the mighty deeds, which is like a flexible feat that you can apply to different things. Wizards obviously get their spells, and as you go up through levels, you get more spells. They have a lower hit point rating, only a d4. That's a classic symbol of a wizard, isn't having a d4 per level. But they can do something, I mentioned you could burn luck earlier. Wizards can burn their statistics. It's called Spellburn, and there's a very good podcast called Spellburn as well. Just a quick shout out to them. Have a look for Spellburn as a podcast. It's a podcast about Dungeon Crawl Classics. Been going for as many years, I think, as Dungeon Crawl Classics has been around, so 7 or 8 years. Probably about 160 plus episodes to watch, but to listen to, but they're all really good listens. They're a great team on there, and they have many of the authors of the different modules and that they've produced and adventures go on Spellburn and chat about why they've designed it like they have. So I've got a lot of inspiration listening to them over the years, so it's worth looking into Spellburn. Yes, so Spellburn is what the wizard can do to get a spell off. Just like you can burn a bit of luck, a wizard, and potentially a cleric, because there's nothing that doesn't to stop a cleric potentially spell burning as well. And it just means that they're literally absorbing the essence of their own body. They're burning down their statistics and they're real damage that they're taking to the statistics, so they'll get lower and they sit at that level, but they do recover slowly. But they'll need long rest to get through it, so it's not something that they can do and then have a long sleep, wake up the next day and then come back and spellburn again. So it's something they can only do every maybe 3 or 4 weeks, depending on how you rest and recover those statistics. But yes, essentially your wizard's up there against the demon. It's that terrible moment in the bottom of a sewer or something. It's burst out the wall and the wizard's thinking, right, I've got 1 or 2 spells left. If I don't make this happen, the party could die. So basically they burn their statistics down, crumpling to the floor almost, although they don't necessarily collapse. It's just you can imagine the drain on a body after it's burnt its own statistics and used up its will and intelligence and whatever else they burn. So yeah, that's what the wizard can do to get their spells off, and it's kind of notorious. A lot of people do mention it, that it's a kind of an expected thing. When are you going to burn to get that spell off really well? And you'll understand later as I get to the bit about spells that why people do spell burn to make a spell really work. Because you think in your traditional D&D games, spells are just spells. You know, you're not going to make a magic missile or a fireball do any more than it normally can do, although there were in 3 and 3.5 edition of D&D, you could maximize things to get more damage out, and you know, you can definitely potentially make them do more damage depending on different aspects of the rules. But in this Dungeon Crawl Classics, you can really make a spell do a lot more damage if you get a much higher roll on the success table for that spell. So let's keep on going. So like I said, I didn't want to go to give you an exhaustive blow-by-blow character creation, but this is skills, and I just get a bit light on this. I won't go diving into it, but basically skills, rather than having a huge swathe of, you know, wood carving, food, cookery and all of that, it's more of a simple kind of approach, in the sense that you'd pick an appropriate statistic and then it'd set a difficulty level. So with a DC 15, it's a task is you know, a feats of a daring do. It takes someone with special ability to accomplish a DC 15. So basically that means you'd have to roll 15 or higher on the dice, but you would modify that by an appropriate statistic bonus. So if it was a feat of strength, you're going to try and rip an iron bar open or something, you would roll your strength bonus and add it to that dice roll to try and get whatever the dungeon master or judge, in the case of DCC, has set for that game, for that particular task. You know, you wanted to dive off a cliff down a waterfall, you would add your agility to that if you had agility bonus, or minus the agility from it if you've got a low statistic in there. So that's basically how most skills are done. So again, if you wanted to listen, you might use your intelligence. If you wanted to try and sway someone to reduce the price in a bargain in a blacksmith, you'd use your personality. And I'm just reminding myself that it is personality, because I get, you know, old age, tend to forget these things. Yeah, personality is the statistic for, which is essentially charisma. So that's a quick overview of skills. They've got opposed checks as well. You know, when you're making that blacksmith bargain to get your sword down to a cheaper price, they would roll at the same time, and there's a higher roll wins with the bonus against it. And it's got equipment. Won't dive into equipment, but you know, you've got all the classic weaponry, and the weaponry. You know, there's some game systems out there now that have very simplified rules for things like weapon damage. So you might say, as a warrior, you just do a D8, like Dungeon World does that kind of approach, which is a fair way of simplifying a game, given that the variance is quite slim in terms of the damage output. But in this, things like battle axes are a nice D10, a nice solid amount of damage there. You know, and then mostly things around the D6 and D8 size. Short bows are a D6. Two-handed swords, so like a big great sword would be a D10. You've got a warhammer in there at a D8. So you've got your classic differences in your weaponry. So over on the Mighty Deeds section here, which I mentioned earlier, it's just giving you an example of blinding attacks, disarming. You can do targeting attacks if you wanted to hit a certain thing, like you were doing something where you wanted to even cut the purse off someone in the middle of a combat or something. You could do that with a precision type blow or a precision shot. So those are what you might have called feats in version 3, but it's looser. It's easier for a character to come up with their own, or they can use these examples in the books. But I'd like a character, if they're playing a warrior, you know, I'd certainly encourage them to say, come up with your own style of fighting that you might, you know, you might quite often kick the dirt into someone's eyes, or you know, because you're a bit tricky in the way that you do your warrior style combat. Or you could just be a big thug and you've got a big old weapon and you're always, you know, trying to knock their shield away or knock off someone's armor because that's your style of approach, that you try and weaken them as you fight them. So that's the Mighty Deeds, and as I said, Mighty Deeds always succeed if you get a 3 or more on your Mighty Deeds dice that only warriors get when they do their attacks. So damage and death, it's worth just mentioning that as well, because that's quite a cool thing that everybody's on about in games, isn't it? And there's a really nice approach in 5e now, isn't there, where you make that roll to see whether they survive, and you tick the boxes down, and you've got 3 attempts before you die. It kind of makes it a little bit easier to try and survive. There's none of that in here. It's nice and simple. As you go up levels, you do get an extra 1 round, I think it is. A character has 1 round in which you can be healed as you bleed out. A level 0 character reaches 0 as they get killed straight away, but a level 1 character reaches 0 as they get 1 round. And I think as you go up a level, you get 1 extra. Yeah, so for each level past the first, a character has 1 more round of bleeding. So basically you're that much tougher. You're holding in your guts as those entrails stream out rubber-like across the floor. You know, you're preventing that stream of blood coming out of your neck vein or whatever it is by sort of grasping onto it, and you're that much better at doing that. So a level 3 character would essentially have 3 rounds to survive. Now this is a feature I really like, and this happens a lot in the level 0 games because the death is just around every corner really, and that's called recovering the body. So in every instance of death, once you're fully dead, you can basically flip a body over. It's that kind of, things have quietened down, the battle's over. You look over in the corner and poor Grimer, the dwarf, took a spear through the gut. He went down, everybody thought he was dead, but you go over, you flip over his body, and he smiles at you because basically he's managed to survive the blow. Everybody thought, oh, he wasn't dead after all. That's good. But they have to make a luck roll, and as I was saying earlier, that's where having a high luck will keep you alive longer, because you just basically roll your d20 and it's got to be under your luck score, and that means you roll over, breathe a sigh of relief as that character's still alive. But there are penalties, so for the next hour you're -4 in everything you do, plus you're supposed to lose a permanent injury as well. So basically you might take you'd roll to see which statistic it was. It could be you're permanently a little bit more unlucky, or you're permanently reduced your strength by 1. And depending, if you're at level 0, I've not always been that harsh to people. So basically when their level 0 characters have been flipped over to see if they're still alive at the end of a scene, I don't necessarily apply this minus to their stats because they're just starting out anyway. But I would do that when they've got to level 1 and above, because you want to make some penalty for the recovering of the body, don't you? And you may even do it at level 0, but if you're doing a one-off game, why bother? You know, if it's a one-shot, it's only going to last 4 or 5 hours with a set of players. There's no reason to go sort of minusing all their stats. It all gets a bit paperwork heavy, doesn't it? But that's really cool to me. These 2 things I really like. Death is brutal, but at the same time, you can have this sort of fun flip over of the body, and they can roll under their luck, and you come back on 1 hit point. So yes, I've said about burning luck before. I think I've probably gone into that enough, but basically it's after you make any kind of roll that fails, because you wouldn't do it if it was succeeding, although you might want to make something succeed more, you can go, I'm going to burn some of my real statistic, reduce it down, and add that to the bonus on the roll, and you do that after you've made it. So, oh no, I've got a 20, so that's a good roll anyway. But if that was a 10 and I happened to need a 12 to succeed in whatever it was I was doing, climbing a wall, attacking something, casting a spell, I can increase that with luck, but it's burnt permanently away, unless you're a halfling or thief, which can regenerate it. As I said, there's a mechanic to do that. What's the other thing that's worth mentioning is action die, because the way that they sort of built the mechanic in here for multi-attacks is that you get an extra action die. So let's go back to the warrior actually, just to sort of mention that, because that's always a thing in people's minds, isn't it? As you go up in levels, how do I make multi-attacks? So it's probably on the table. Yeah, so here again, this comes back, and it's probably a time now to mention the multiple funky dice and get up close and personal with those. Is that when a warrior reaches level 5, they get a D20 and a D14 action dice. So by that, I shall bring these over, and here's the sort of full range that they do. I think that's a D14. So basically, when that warrior reaches level 5, they would go woohoo to start with, because they'd be like, yes, I'm going to be like hitting things twice around now. But the second dice they roll is a lower figure. So basically, it's a controlling factor over that attack, in that essentially they would roll it and say, I'm going to do 2 attacks. I'm going to hack across the guts of this orc beast in front of me, and then I'm going to swing up against its head afterwards. And you'd roll the 2, and you'd go, whoops, this is such a low roll on my d20, but I've ended up with a 14 on there. Now the critical, and this is also a controller over criticals so that people can't double crit, in that the critical of a 20 is only on that natural 20 roll. As far as I know, if you get the max on the lower dice and it's not a 20, that's not going to give you a critical. It will give you a hit, but it's the clean 20 that's going to give you the critical on there. So as I said, this is live, so I'm just having another drink because I'm getting parched. So Andy said, not 6 in 1 month, 1 month for each of the 6 months. Okay, so too busy with life and other hobby pursuits to prep and then DM more than once a month. So I do my games generally every 2 weeks, so which is interesting because I look forward to a game every 2 weeks, and of course I'm going off at a tangent here on sessions. But I used to game, I mean, I did 10 years where it's every week. And I tell you what would happen there is that you'd actually get some really bad weeks where 1 or maybe 2 or 3 even of your 5 people in the room were not in a good mood that week for whatever reason, because it was very regular. But you could still end up with a good game, and then obviously looking back over time, having that once a week, you wouldn't forget things. The players would be on the ball with whatever the adventure was, and that was great. The other opposite of that, which I'm finding now, is because I run every 2 weeks, we gather back together after 2 weeks. That may end up being 3 because someone couldn't make it or what have you. And you end up forgetting, as a games master, I forget what's going on, as players also forget. So we have to kind of do a quiz at the outset to try and remind ourselves, and remind me as a games master what was going on. So swings and roundabouts, really. A weekly game is great for continuity, and you can look back over it, but you also end up with some rough sessions, which I've had a few times before. So, right, is the stream healthy? Is it still going? Yes. According to Facebook, I've got 3 viewers, and YouTube's got 2 viewers, so I think I'm still in action. Magic, then. So Spellburn, as I mentioned before, and another aspect of the rules which I haven't really delved into, is tables. Now, we all love a table as a geek, and this has plenty of tables in this lovely thick book. And what they've done is they've made things like Magic really unique, and it's a completely unique feature of these rules. There's nothing else out there like it. I mean, the closest might have been back in the day, things like Rollmaster and Merp had tables, but their tables were quite vanilla, and it was just, you know, it's essentially you'd roll a dice on there to see the amount of damage. It was just a reference. Whereas the tables in here are actually absolutely key to how things like a spell work or how you fumble, and they're really neatly put together. And in fact, I don't think they slow down the game at all. And there's also some nice reference books you can get with this information in it. But on the whole, they're a really nice feature. So how do they work? So, for example, with Spellburn, which I mentioned before as well, that's where you're just taking away your statistics from your wizard. But I will go on to some of the details here about the magic by picking up on a couple of things. First of all, magic's really dangerous, and in that chaos style of Michael Moorcock, where there's that continual chaos influencing the realms that is a danger to people that dabble in the dark arts and the magics, there is a corruption that happens to wizards in here. I mean, they've got a rather gruesome view here. Is this a Doug Kovacs? Is it? Probably is a piece of artwork, but it goes from your basic apprentice wizard When they're an ancient, wizened old wizard, they've been so corrupted by all the spells they've got that they're no longer practically human. But you can take this how you like in the game. Essentially, you don't have to completely corrupt someone to pieces, but it is a very nice feature that the more you dabble, there is a risk when you do a spell that you could end up with some corruption. And then they get major as well from there. If you get, as you go up in levels, you may end up with a greater corruption, which is pretty gruesome. Like fingers on one hand fuse while the thumb enlarges. After 1 week, the hand is transformed into a crab claw, so you turn into Zoidberg with that one. And you've got misfires for spells. So I'm trying to get to an actual spell so I can show you spells. So basically you've got wizard spells, so a whole nice section here, nicely detailed again. Well, the other thing, table layout in these books is brilliant. They really make it easy to find a specific table for something because they're all neatly labelled with a number, which is great, so a big plus point there. Animal summoning. Let's try and find a basic one like Choking Cloud. I'll find one that's nice and easy to comprehend. Featherfall. Flaming Hands. Look, I'd even put a marker in there to talk about Flaming Hands. So basically the first thing is there's a manifestation on here that can be tuned to the character. Now, sometimes some people play these manifestations where they'd roll this every time, but I wouldn't. I'd lock that in on a wizard. So when they learn Flaming Hands, it's a level 1 spell, the first thing you do is roll a d4. This is a quirky looking d4 I've got here. It's one of the funky dice, but it is just a d4 with the numbers on the edges. So I've got a 3. And this means that whenever I use this spell, it manifests as a caster's hands turned into rolling, smoking flame. So that's quite interesting. It adds a kind of distinctness to that particular wizard. Or if you roll a 4 on there, every time you use this, the skin blackens and peels away to reveal skeletal hands dripping in lava. So again, very evocative and a bit of fun. It's not going to affect the character anyway. The hands aren't melting off. It's just a creative bit of extra narrative on there. The player knows every time they use their Flaming Hands, this is the manifestation they've got, and they can make up their own as well. They could say, my anything. It could be like my hands turn red and the nails turn into sparks that light up. Anything that you like, you could make that up, or you could just roll on there. And then there's corruptions for failure, so you could end up with permanently blackened hands, and you've got a misfire here as well. But this is where the spells get very interesting in the sense that at a low level, when you're rolling, you're not going to be coming up at a very high point. You're going to be rolling your d20 up to the 20 mark, and basically a spell produces a blast of fire that burns a single target within range for 1d6 points of damage. If you're on the 12 to 13 success, a single blast is 1d3, and then you can lose the spell that day. Now that's another unique feature of these rules, is that you can remember the spell and you lose it. You have to memorize it again the next day, kind of thing. But you could reuse it if you haven't rolled under that 11 on your success roll. And that could be another one of those reasons you want that luck that I mentioned burning earlier, because you could go, oh, I've rolled and I'm going to end up losing this spell, but actually I've burned one of my luck off, and it means that I've got this over the edge, and then I've got a single blast out, and then I can use the spell again, because it's not forgotten that day unless you come under the lost failure section. Now someone can try and I believe that's the way it works. That's how I've been playing it, but probably there could be some additional point that someone's going to say that you do forget it, and maybe this is lost forever, but I don't think it's lost forever. No, that's just lost for that day. If you roll a 1, of course, on your d20, you're lost, failure, and worse. You could end up with a corruption, a thing called a patron taint, because the other thing wizards get is they get patrons that are like either a kind of a demigod or devil or some other high-powered wizard that they offer their patronage to, which can give them bonuses. There's a whole section on that. I won't go into that today because I think I've already done an hour or so on this. So if I go, I've just hit the hour point. But what I might do, if people are interested in this, I could actually go and do another session where I just focus on the wizards and went through everything to do with how they use their spells and get a patron, which they've got patrons in the book, and they've also got them in the adventure modules as well. But that Spellburn, which I mentioned earlier, where you really just drain down all the statistics of your wizard to get a particular effect going. That's how you get higher up on this chart down here, by doing a spell burn. And you get down to the bottom area of this, where, if I move it over, the higher results, the success roll for this is a caster can blast fire in 360-degree arc outward from his body. Within that complete radius, he can pick one wedge where fire does not blast, so that could protect your companions stood behind you. And all creatures within the affected arc out to a range of 40 foot are immolated, taking 4d10 damage. So if you can imagine, that could be absolutely brutal if you got up to that level. And you would get there by rolling the spell dice plus adding in the spell burn that you've got. Plus, as you go up levels, let's have a look at the spellcaster. I guess have a look at the wizard again, just to check what that is. So their action dice here do go up as well, and they get extra spells. Look at this, as you get up to level 5, you get 8 spells, and they've got a crit tape, a dice of a d10, and +2 attack. Yeah, so basically as you go up levels, you are potentially, you're still rolling on a d20 for these, but you could actually roll a second one as well. So yes, that's generally, I mean, it's can be notorious for convention games, because what people sometimes do is they'll hold on to that wizard's spell burn moment right into the last moment of the game to get that brutal attack off. Not necessarily flaming hands. There's a whole load of very interesting things in here, like there's summoning monsters and other bits and pieces. Some of them I can't fully get my head around, like mending. Why you'd want to really mend something so much better than normally. But if we have a look on here, the top level of mending, the caster permanently repairs very large objects of great complexity at a range of 100 foot. So yeah, you can see how that could still work, because this isn't mending just going to fix someone's short sword that's got damaged or rusty. This is potentially bringing a castle wall back up after it's been felled by an army, if you happen to use it at that level. And that also really does make this game great for that leveling up and making you feel powerful as a wizard, because you're not going to pick up your level 1 mending and just make a dagger oily so that it's no longer rusting. You're going to be able to use your mending spell to, like I say, bring up a castle wall or fix something incredibly complicated that's been broken, like a cannon or anything. Although I don't think there's gunpowder in it, so not a cannon, but some other kind of blasting thing could be repaired. And there's also that patron bond, which I mentioned, which is where, as a wizard, you're trying to pick up a patron that gives you benefits. And that's another way of colouring in your character with some really interesting abilities. Plus, when you gain that patron, it's adding into the game itself, because it gives the judge, which is the games master, some additional influence on the story and how you interact with that patron as well. It's like a decent connection to start to hanging bits of plot off, and can flesh out a game. Obviously, with the wizards get the patron, but the clerics get a deity as well that they can. There's not as many deities in the book, I don't think, but let's try and find the cleric as the first one on the list. Actually, the cleric. Yeah, so they can get divine aid if they worship a deity, and they can pick a particular deity, and they have benefits for that as well. So just like with the wizard having a patron, there's bonuses and there's negatives to it as well. But in the case of a cleric, there's some rules around how that operates as well, and different modules have different adventures have different deities in there they could pick up. So yeah. Oh, and of course, turn unholy. You've got the classic clerics turn unholy, just to dive in onto that. So I think that's a good taster. I've done an hour and 9 minutes on Dungeon Crawl Classics, and I thought I've gone like a shotgun over everything in there. Probably gone a bit too quick in some areas and probably made some mistakes as well. But I didn't want to go down really into character creation or that kind of real fine detail, because you just couldn't cover it in an hour. But that doesn't mean these rules are complicated. They are simple at their heart, in that you're rolling the D20 to hit an armor class when you're attacking, You're adding that Mighty Deeds die if you're a warrior, and you can burn your luck, and you've got your basic set of statistics. And the other thing is the classic, when you're saving against spells or fireballs or anything coming in at the party, you've got a fortitude save, a reflex save, and a will save. So fortitude against poison and constitution effects, and then reflex will give you against when you've got to dodge out the way of a fireball, and then a will save against some kind of charm control over the character. So those again hark back to the 3X edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and they're really nice and easy to remember. In fact, I'll show off this thing I've done here actually that just gives you an overview of those statistics, and we can zoom into it a little bit. So basically I did a character sticker, really. Just I made these on bits of card and sketched it out so I could print out a few of these while I'm playing. And this gives you the profile of a monster in the game. I had a demon I made up called Demon Sarg. But essentially this is the statistics. I gave it an ID, just than that you can ignore, that's just my ID so I can reference it. But if it's got 20 hit points, its initiative is +0, so when you're rolling for initiative it would just be a +0 for this monster. I've got the move down as 20 foot, I've got an armor class, I've got those action dice as I mentioned, because even the monsters can have multiple attacks, which means they'd have more than one action dice. This one's just got one. He's got a +6 to his melee attack and he does 1d8 damage. And then I've got the fortitude, reflex and will saves there, and that 20 hit points I've got them down here referenced in blocks of 5 just as a quick reference card. But there, when I'm creating a monster to use of my own, which they do encourage as well in the book, it's very much don't just go for your classic orcs or your classic skeletons. You can make up interesting quirky things to use in here, and they give you a table on how to create your own monsters too. Which is really dead simple, but I use these cards just because when I'm running a game I just want a quick reference that I can just put beside myself and go, okay, what monster's that? When I've done the damage to it, the characters tell me, and I just fill in one of the little boxes on there as well. So that's the profile of what you'd look at as a monster in a game, and you can do those really simply, and they've really encouraged that creativity to come up with your own monsters. So there we go. So I've got a bit of me in the picture there because I've zoomed a bit too far out. You can see my shorts. That is Dungeon Crawl Classics, and hopefully that was in a nutshell and not in a crazy shell of me just firing out my ideas about it. I will now just mention those dice again though. I'll move this out of the way and just zoom in on these down here. So basically this is the set of dice that you can buy, which is, some people think it's a bit of a barrier to getting into the game. I think, it's a fun, quirky thing. I can never have enough dice. And you're going to be covered for all the basics anyway. You're going to have your D20, you're going to have a D6, because you'll have all those in your set already. You've essentially already got a D3, because that's just half a D6, but that's that one there. Your classic D100 for the percentile rolls is in there. This is actually a D4, but they just made it look a bit different, sort of a quirky shape D4. Put that down there, you can see it's up on the edges, so it's got rounded edges. That's a D4. D12s, most people have a D12, so that's a standard. But then as you scale up, like I was saying about those extra Mighty Deeds dice and things that the warriors get, you might go up to a D5 like that one, and that is a very unusual shape. And then you've got a D7, I think this is. Yeah, that's a D7, which is again very unusual shape with the edge location with the 7 on it. You've got a D8 standard again, like every other system. And then a D12, and I think that's, this is a D14, so that's a bit different. I've showed a D12 over there already. D14, and then this one, which is I think is a D16. And then more D6s there. But then you've got a D24, which is when you're bumping up your action die even higher. So yeah, this is a D24, and then a D30. D30s are not going to get used too much, but there's lots of tables and things that you might need a D30 in there. I've just realised I've forgotten two things which I'm going to jump back to because I think I wanted to cover them. And I did want to get those dice out of the way. So Funky Dice, you can buy the dice sets from Goodman Games. Other companies do them. I found I can get most of these on eBay quite cheaply from China as well. they don't do the full set from China. You miss out on things like the D5 and the D7. But I've paid under like $4 or $5 for a full set that included a D30 and some of the like D16s and things like that. But if you want the full set, the Goodman Games do them. And they're a lot of fun to use because it's just interesting to get those dice out onto the table. And as a old grognard, I like to sort of pull out the dice. So there is that one more thing I wanted to talk about to get clear on what happens in the system, and that's criticals and fumbles. I thought, well, I better mention those because they're quite key again to the game, and it's the one thing that I've missed. So over here we have a critical table for level 0 characters and wizards, and then that increases as you go up in levels again. So level 3 to 4 warriors will get a slightly better critical, and this again differentiates. And just like that spell I mentioned earlier, the mending, that like level 1 you're rolling low and your mending is fixing someone's sword, but then as you're a mighty wizard at level 7, you've got the potential to recreate a castle wall that's collapsed with your mending. It's similar again with the criticals for attacks. So basically, when you're a level 0, you just roll a d4. Let's roll a d4 over here. So I've got a 4. You'd add your luck to that because luck does apply, or minus your luck if you've got a negative luck because you're an unlucky character. But if it was a straight 4 and I had no bonus or minus, I would strike to foe's kneecap, inflicting a d4 damage. So first of all, to get that critical effect, I needed to roll a 20 on my attack. So whatever character at level 0 was attacking, I'll try and find a 20 on my d20. You'd need a 20 on your roll, and then basically you'd then roll on the critical table afterwards, which is adds to your damage. So you'd roll a 20, you do the damage of the weapon, so if it was a warhammer or something, you do 7 damage from your d8, and then you would add whatever comes up in the penalty in here. And you can, of course, then as you go up levels, you can increase this. So as you're up a higher level, again, if I went over to something like a level 3 to 4 warrior, which is the same for level 4 to 5 dwarves, when they critical, I mean, they're really nasty things that happen. Like on a 7, foe is driven back by a furious assault, inflict a plus 2d12 damage with this strike. So unlike D&D, you're not just doubling your damage, you're rolling on a table. And obviously what you can do is hand out the appropriate table to the warrior character. They can sit with this in their hand, and they know that if they get a critical, they're going to get something very interesting happen depending on what level they are. And again, here it says critical table for clerics, halflings, level 1 and 2 warriors, level 1 to 3 dwarves. So that varies and makes the different character classes work differently. And obviously, clerics and halflings, they're frozen at this crit table 3. They don't get to go up to this higher levels because it's just for warriors and dwarves that get the really nasty close combat stuff happening. So that's a critical when you roll that neat 20. And the fumble, so you rolled a 1 on an attack, there is a fumble table, and again this is affected by your luck. So if you have a positive luck, it actually reduces your fumble. But the other thing with fumbles is affected by armor. So heavier armor you might roll a d6 for, I don't know specifically because I'm making this up, but I think maybe if you've got leather armor on, you might roll a d6. I know a level 0 character, I think it's not depending on character level, it's depending on the armor. But whatever your armor is will have a fumble roll associated with it. And I rolled a 4 there, so your weapon is damaged, a bowstring breaks, a sword hilt falls off. So again, it's just adding that bit of fun in there for a failure on a fumble. Anything, and obviously as you go higher up here, if you've got a really terrible critical of 16 plus, because maybe you're in really heavy armor and you're really unlucky, on the roll, you accidentally strike yourself from normal damage plus an extra point. In addition, you fall on your back and are able to right yourself until you make an agility check, because obviously you've got really heavy armor on to get down to here, and you just collapse down as a knight on the floor. And they've got some fun artwork here, haven't they, to sort of show how that happens as well, in terms of an axe head falling off. So that was it. And of course, because this was live, I had completely forgotten to go through the critical and the fumble tables, which are affected by that luck statistic. And that's it.